Welcome to the deep dive. You've sent over some really fascinating sources looking into, well, why we humans sometimes follow the rules and sometimes don't.
Right. Why we obey authority or why we choose to disobey.
And trying to make sense of it all can feel like a lot, honestly. So today, that's our mission. Cut through the complexity and get to the heart of what these sources are telling us.
Exactly. We're diving into this really fundamental human dynamic, obedience, disobedience. It seems simple, maybe, but it's incredibly complex, shapes almost everything.
And we mean everything. It's not just, a modern problem. These sources show it goes way back, affects relationships, society, history.
And some concepts even echo in places you wouldn't expect, like physics or math. Not literally, of course, but as helpful analogies. Ways to grasp the dynamics.
Right. Think of them as mental models.
So yeah, our goal is to pull out those key insights, those aha moments, so you can really understand how this plays out, in your world.
Okay, let's kick off with just how universal this is. The sources are clear. This isn't niche. It's foundational.
Totally foundational. Cuts across everything. Think about a little kid and a hot stove. You tell them don't touch. They obey usually for safety.
Or adults in the workplace, right, navigating rules, who's in charge, different context, same dynamic.
And adolescence. That's a key time the sources highlight. All that questioning, sometimes pushing back, it's part of figuring out who you are.
And it affects everyone regardless of gender. Though, yeah, history shows expectations around obedience have differed based on gender roles.
True. But the core choice, comply or resist that, seems universal.
And across cultures, too.
Absolutely. Authority looks different everywhere. It could be elders, governments, religious figures, whatever. But the reaction, deference, or rejection, that's constant.
Like those Milgram studies they replicated elsewhere.
Exactly. They found obedience, sure, but the levels varied quite a bit depending on the culture. Shows it's both a universal capacity and culturally shaped.
Wow. And it changes across our lifespan, too.
It really does. Infancy, it's about survival, depending on caregivers. Childhood, learning social rules. Adolescence, that big questioning phase.
And adulthood is just ongoing negotiation with different authorities, basically.
Pretty much. Even into old age, you see established patterns, maybe deference, maybe ingrained resistance from life experience.
And historically, this dynamic seems like a major engine.
Oh, huge. Think ancient laws like Hammurabi's Code. That's about enforcing obedience, Roman legions. Strict obedience was crucial.
Then you get the Enlightenment, questioning divine right, questioning everything.
Exactly. And more recently, you have the horror of the Holocaust, with the just following orders, defense.
Chilling.
Contrasted with figures like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., using principled disobedience to change the world. It's this constant tension driving history.
So the effects are just massive.
Incredibly far-reaching, like you said, history. Obedience allows for big projects, stability, building things together.
But disobedience, that's the spark for change.
Yeah.
Revolutions, reform movements.
Often, yes. It challenges the status quo. Obedience builds the structure, maybe, and disobedience pushes it to evolve.
Okay, the genetics and biology part, that was interesting. It's not one obedience gene, right?
No, definitely not. More like evolutionary pressures probably favored groups where individuals generally followed useful rules or trusted leaders.
Yeah.
Helped survival.
Made sense in early human groups.
But blind obedience is dangerous. So the capacity to disobey, to question a bad leader or a harmful tradition, that would also be vital. It's a balance.
And it influenced by lots of factors, like genes related to conformity, risk-taking, empathy.
All of those, yeah. And aggression levels, too, probably. They all mix together to influence how we respond in a given situation with authority.
Even our stress hormones, like cortisol.
For sure. You feel stressed when forced to obey against your will, and you feel stressed, maybe fear, when deciding to disobey and face consequences. Biology is involved.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Philosophy. Seems like thinkers have wrestled with this forever.
Oh, absolutely. It's central to ethics and politics. You've got Plato, with Socrates arguing for obeying Athens' laws, even when facing death. That's a powerful case for obedience to the state.
Even if the law seems unjust in that instance.
In Socrates' view in the Credo, yes, for the sake of the overall social contract. But then you jump forward to Thoreau, saying your own conscience is the highest authority. Civil disobedience.
That's the fundamental conflict, isn't it? Society's rules versus individual conscience.
Exactly. And different ethical systems, deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, they all offer ways to analyze whether obedience or disobedience is the right thing in a situation.
The big questions being, who counts as a legitimate authority? When am I complicit if I obey? Is there ever a duty to disobey?
Precisely those questions. Now, this next connection might seem like a leap, but the sources use analogies from physics and math. Again, analogies, not literal laws.
Okay, how does that work? Physics.
Think of authority like a force field. It exerts pressure. We're like particles. Some align easily, that's obedience. Others resist disobedience.
And critical mass. Like enough people resisting causes a big shift.
Kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Or a phase transition. It's just a way to visualize how small acts of defiance can sometimes snowball into major societal change. Helps picture the dynamics.
Makes sense. And math. Game theory.
Right. The prisoner's dilemma is a classic example. It shows the tension between doing what's best for you right now, maybe breaking a rule, disobeying a social contract, versus what's best for the group if everyone cooperates, which needs obedience.
That me versus we tension.
Exactly. And then there's that simplified risk-reward equation the sources mentioned for deciding whether to disobey.
Yeah, the P times B minus P times C thing. Probability of success times benefit minus probability of failure times cost, compared to the cost of just obeying.
Right. But super simplified, as the source stressed. Assigning those numbers, highly subjective, and doesn't really capture the emotional weight, you know?
True, but it shows the kind of implicit calculation we might be doing.
It gives a basic framework, yeah. Then you have the actual stats, like Milgram. About 65% obedience in his main study.
That's a lot.
It is. And the cross-cultural studies showing that range, maybe 40% to 80% obedience, depending on the country, it really drives home how much context matters.
And logic comes into it too, like trusting experts.
Yeah, the argument from authority, not always bad. We trust doctors, right?
Right.
But it's flawed if the authority isn't actually legitimate or if we follow blindly.
And the slippery slope idea?
Comes up all the time. Either don't disobey, it leads to chaos,
Yeah.
or too much obedience leads to tyranny. And how developed our own moral reasoning is like Kohlberg's stages affects how we judge obedience.
So it's not just external stuff. Our state of mind is crucial. How does obeying feel?
Can feel safe, like you belong.
Yeah.
Righteous, if you believe in the authority. But if it clashes with your values, that's cognitive dissonance, stress, guilt.
And then that agentic state, feeling like a puppet.
Exactly. Feeling like you're just an agent for someone else, less responsible. Milgram's term. Disobedience, though, that can be scary. Isolating.
But also empowering.
Hugely empowering sometimes. A sense of integrity, acting on your principles. Even exhilaration, that righteous anger the sources talk about. Powerful motivator.
And specific emotions drive these choices too, right? Fear, pushing obedience.
Anger fueling disobedience. Happiness from rewards or successful resistance.
Yeah.
Guilt, empathy, they could pull us either way depending on the situation.
And belief systems, religion, ideology.
Major influence. They often demand obedience, creating cohesion. But they can also justify terrible oppression. Yet they also contain stories of heroic disobedience based on faith or principle. It's complex.
Truth versus lies seems critical here. Obeying falsehoods.
Devastating potential. Propaganda relies on it, which makes whistleblowers, those who disobey to reveal harmful truths, so vital, even with the risks.
It even impacts basic well-being, concentration, health, sleep.
Makes sense, doesn't it? The stress of forced compliance, the anxiety of defiance, it takes a toll. Even obeying health guidelines is a form of obedience to medical authority, though questioning is sometimes needed too.
So back to those evolutionary roots. Obedience helped groups survive, but disobedience was needed for adaptation.
That's the idea, a balance.
Yeah.
Psychologically, we have this deep need for order, safety, belonging. We look for legitimate authority. We fear consequences, want rewards.
And we take mental shortcuts. Heuristics.
We do. Sometimes we just obey automatically. And that agentic shift, handing off responsibility, that's a key psychological mechanism.
But we also crave autonomy, justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are powerful drivers for disobedience. And it's not just psychology, it's the situation.
Right, like how close you are to the victim in Milgram's setup.
Exactly. Proximity to victim, proximity and presence of the authority figure, what the group around you is doing. Ash's conformity studies showed that powerfully.
And how things escalate slowly, the foot in the door technique.
Yes.
Yes.
Small acts of compliance make bigger ones easier later. It's this whole web of internal and external factors.
And how does this develop over a lifetime?
Well, early childhood, learning basic safety rules from parents. Middle childhood, school, peers, sense of fairness starts developing.
Then adolescence, the big pushback, questioning everything.
Right. And adulthood is just navigating it all. Workplaces, government, relationships, constant negotiation.
Okay, let's talk AI. The sources mention its potential role, but cautiously, helping understand patterns.
Yeah, maybe analyzing large data sets to see trends in obedience or dissent, modeling how things might play out, potentially identifying biases in how authority works or dissent is handled.
Analyzing propaganda sounds useful.
Potentially, yes. Identifying manipulation techniques and simulations ethical dilemmas played out virtually to explore consequences safely.
But improving well-being with AI here.
Yeah.
That sounds tricky. We shouldn't just aim to feel good all the time, right?
No, definitely not. Negative feelings have a purpose. But maybe AI tools could help boost critical thinking, help us evaluate authorities and information better.
Secure platforms for whistleblowing. Personalized ethical frameworks.
Interesting ideas, but with huge ethical flags, obviously. De-biasing our own decisions, maybe.
Well,
Chatbots offering mental health support for the stress involved. Plausible, but needs care.
So, stepping back, who actually benefits from obedience and disobedience?
It's nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good, legitimate authorities benefit from obedience when rules are fair. Society benefits from stable, just laws being followed. But
Power holders benefit regardless.
often, yeah. Especially if the obedience is unquestioning. Disobedience, though, that primarily benefits the oppressed, the marginalized, those challenging injustice.
And society in the long run, maybe? By forcing change?
Absolutely. And the individual's conscience.
Yeah.
Acting with integrity benefits you and maybe future generations if it leads to positive change.
Which brings us to the really dark side. Cruelty, killing, and obedience.
Yeah, the sources link obedience directly to historical atrocities, people claiming they were just following orders.
What makes that possible?
A toxic mix, dehumanizing victims, making them seem less than human. That agentic state, I'm not responsible. Gradual escalation starting small, getting desensitized, and powerful group ideologies that justify horror.
And what about people supposedly born without humanity, like psychopaths?
The sources touch on that, conditions like psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder. The key seems to be diminished empathy and a self-serving approach. They'll obey or disobey based purely on what benefits them, without the usual moral breaks.
So they might kill through obedience if it serves them, or through disobedience to moral rules.
Exactly. Driven by power, ideology, maybe sadism, or just perceived self-interest, without the same concern for other suffering.
Okay, another big leap. AI and the meaning of life, the idea that life is all there is. How does obedience-disobedience fit there?
Profound stuff. AI can't answer meaning of life questions, obviously. It lacks consciousness.
But if you believe this life is it, does that change the stakes for obeying or disobeying?
It could heighten them dramatically. No afterlife for justice means the fight for justice now becomes paramount. So maybe more drive to resist oppression. Or, potentially, the opposite nihilism, nothing matters.
And when you die, the need to understand this ends for you.
For the individual, yes, but the impact of their choices lives on.
Okay, slightly lighter topic. Perception, humor, how does that relate?
Humor is so cultural, right?
Yeah.
We laugh often based on social norms, a kind of conformity.
Mm-hmm.
But satire, that often works by disobeying conventions, challenging authority.
And when a joke bombs because nobody laughs.
Shows a disconnect with the group's norms, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Or an unspoken agreement not to endorse the joke's premise.
And resilience, how does that connect?
Seems linked to both. Knowing when obedience provides needed structure, especially in chaos, but also knowing when disobedience is necessary to challenge harm. It's about flexibility.
Cognitive flexibility, discerning when to do what.
Exactly. Not blind obedience, not blind rebellion, wise judgment.
We seem to develop an intuition for this stuff, don't we? Power dynamics, how obedience plays out.
We do. Through experience, observation, maybe some innate social sense. But it's important to remember, obedience and disobedience are part of life for social beings like us, not the entirety of it.
Tools we use.
Strategies, maybe. And while other animals have hierarchies and challenges, they don't have our complex moral dimension to it.
Could AI help with coping strategies related to authority conflicts?
Potentially. Identifying someone's coping mechanisms are unhelpful, suggesting things like assertiveness skills, boundary setting, therapeutic applications.
Analyzing physical signs of conformity was mentioned too. Ethically tricky.
Very tricky. Analyzing nonverbal cues raises huge privacy and misuse concerns. Needs extreme caution.
Okay, last couple of points. Freedom, belief, and teaching kids. Believing in freedom often fuels disobedience, right?
Definitely. Against oppression, while authorities often frame obedience as virtuous.
Why don't we explicitly teach kids more about navigating this?
Good question. Maybe focuses on compliance early on. It's complex. Fear of undermining authority. But good parenting and education do teach related skills.
Like critical thinking, empathy, moral reasoning.
Exactly. The goal isn't just obedience or disobedience. It's responsible, ethical decision-making.
And finally, the idea that once you understand this dynamic, you can't really go back. You lose some naivety.
I think so. You become more aware of power, of your own susceptibility, your own responsibility. It's maybe unsettling.
But maybe necessary for more conscious living.
That's a good way to put it. The price and the reward of deeper insight into being human.
So wrapping up, these sources really show just how complex this obedience-disobedience dance is. It's absolutely central to us, to society.
And no easy answers. What we see is this constant human effort trying to build fair, accountable authority and trying to cultivate the wisdom in each of us to choose well.
So a final thought for you, the listener. Maybe take a moment to reflect on your own life. Your experiences with obeying, with disobeying, the authorities you navigate. When did you comply? When did you resist? Why?
That ongoing internal conversation, it seems like a vital part of this whole experiment of life.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
This is DigitView.